We are back, Heartland Developer Conference 2016 here in Omaha. I'm here with Arthur Doler, and we are here kind of covering keynotes and session speakers. You're one of the session speakers. Before we dive in a little bit to what you're talking about here, have you spoke already, or is it coming up?
I spoke yesterday.
You spoke yesterday. Workshop. Good. So we'll ask about some of the questions that you had, but let's get to know you a little bit. Who you are, where you're from, who you work for, those kinds of things. What are the vitals that we need to know about you?
Okay. I've been a software developer for 13 years. I work for a company called Avature, which is just about a mile that way. Unfortunately,
good, close by.
Yeah, unfortunately convenient in some ways.
Yes.
And I've been doing software for a long time. Like I said, 13 years.
What kind of languages are
at this point? Anything. Okay. In the past year and a half, I think I've worked in .NET, C#, Java, multiple different front-end JavaScript languages like Backbone, Angular, Angular 2. Now I'm doing TypeScript. I've done PHP. I mean, all this within the last year.
Wow.
And then also some Unity stuff. So, I mean, it's a lot of different things.
Yeah. I'm seeing in the industry, I'm seeing a lot more of that, where instead of being a specialist in one, more of a generalist or specialist too. It depends on this, in all, not all, but in a lot of them. It's kind of a, depending on the role that you're in, it kind of, you might need to move in and out of different frameworks kind of based on the role. Yeah. Are you in a role? What kind of role are you in now?
I'm just an engineer at the moment.
Okay. Contract work? Are you working, but Avature, I'm not familiar with what they do. So what do they do?
We do some Department of Defense stuff. We do, the bulk of our work is B2B, business to business stuff. Okay. So contracting, but on a scale, it's not like we don't usually do staff augmentation. We usually try to do delivering solutions to clients, that kind of stuff.
How big? How big's the company?
About 80 developers.
Okay. On all here in the Omaha area, or dispersed?
We have some. It's pretty dispersed. Well, most of us are in the Omaha area, and then there are some dispersed.
Okay. So. Very good. Well, let's dig in a little bit to your session, why you were here yesterday. You had Wednesday was extended workshops, right? Yep. And so kind of give us, ease us into it. What did you hope to get accomplished? And then what happened during the session?
Okay. So I was giving a workshop on feedback, on giving and receiving feedback, specifically with Legos.
Really?
Because everybody likes to play with Legos.
Yeah, I love Legos.
So I was trying to do this workshop and show people, first off, how you give good feedback, and more importantly, how you receive feedback well, rather, and trying to go into some of the things that your brain does in order to almost protect itself from feedback. If you start to get into things, if you're familiar with social psychology, have you ever read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow?
I have not, no.
He kind of describes the brain in two types of systems. You have a slow thinking, which is the very critical, conscious, logical side, and then you have the fast side, which is where all of these cognitive biases and prejudices and things live. And the reason that exists is because it's a lot more efficient. Thinking slowly requires a lot of sugar, which is what your brain runs on. So all of these cognitive biases and things evolved as a result of so basically evolution just going, well, that's good enough.
Yeah, good enough. And survival too. Sometimes a quick reaction would be really, really important, right?
So like facial recognition is hardwired into the brain because it's really important for survival. But so I was trying to give an idea of, hey, when you give people feedback, your brain is doing this. It's trying to do these things like, for instance, wrong spotting, which is you look for something to be wrong in the feedback, anything to be wrong in the feedback, or with the person who's giving the feedback. Yeah. And if you find one wrong thing, your brain just pumps its fist and chucks the entire piece of feedback out, regardless of whether the rest of it might be applicable or not. So
and you might have read it wrong, and it was, and then there was other information in there that was helpful. So let me ask you, I sometimes, I'm probably a perfect example. We all do this. I get a comment or some feedback in, and I immediately want to fire back, right? You just want to, and I do social media for Gallup, so this is really, really common type thing. So what kind of, as I work through this feedback, if I'm and we also, we all read everything negatively, as opposed to, we come, if it's in print, we come at it from a negative perspective is that true?
Somewhat. If you're in person with somebody, it's actually really hard to get negative feedback sometimes.
Right.
Because we're social animals, and most of the time we don't want to insult each other. Yeah. And
except when we're writing.
Yes. Well, it's that point when the same thing with the web. When you're distanced from the person, you're able to, you're not right in front of them. So it's a lot easier for you to go, hey, you're a jerk on the, or something stronger on Twitter.
Right.
But that reaction that you're coming back at this person and you want to defend your own position, you want to respond to their feedback and prove that it's wrong and you were correct. Because that's a lot easier to do than to sit back and think, was there something right in that feedback? So
how do I make that switch? Because there's been oftentimes I have thought, if I could just sit for an extra minute, right, and respond, because for me, when that negative feedback comes in, or it's seemingly negative, there's some physiological processes that happen in me, right? My heart rate would increase, my temperature probably goes up. Are those?
So one of the things that I learned, I think it was a couple months ago, that's been the most interesting to me is that so are you familiar with the fight or flight reaction?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So for listeners who might not be familiar, it's a reaction in your brain where your brain hits a point where it's like, I have to either flee or fight this person. Yeah. So like I've been backed into a corner, and if you get like a squirrel or something into this, they will attack things much larger than them and do things. But it's your brain dumps adrenaline. It kicks your system into high gear. What I learned is that humans, because we're social animals, have like that system has been wired into our social system. So if you encounter someplace where your social status is being challenged, your body does a fight or flight reaction, which is like explains the vast bulk of the internet. So especially on something where it's like Twitter, which is a very public platform, right? It's somebody is coming up to you and saying, hey, challenging you, kind of like if they give you a question in an aggressive question after a session. Right. And you have to, as far as I know, the only way to really deal with that is to practice, to have somebody that you trust. Essentially, I mean, it's like almost like lobbing fastballs at your head. Just sit there and say things at you and have you feel that reaction and know what that feels like. Meditation helps. Mindfulness meditation helps a lot because then you're kind of aware of what that feels like physically, and you can use that awareness to be like, oh, okay, I'm having one of these, I got to calm down, walk away from the keyboard for 5 minutes and come back to it. It's a little less when you're getting constructive feedback or constructive criticism from someone, but it's in those cases still your brain is trying to optimize to save itself energy. So you have to be careful and kind of abstract yourself emotionally from some of these things.
No, and I have felt that experience. In fact, I've been trying to be aware of it when it's happening. So to realize, okay, because my job is so much online, because I have to respond to people in that way. And I always, it's very interesting. I even have measured how I feel before and then immediately after I respond.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. And so before there's this anxiety, and responding almost alleviates. Now it depends on how I responded. It almost alleviates. That's almost the flight, right? So there's the fright and flight. And when you send that email off or whatever, it alleviates some. Now, there's some ramifications on the backside sometimes, right, that begins. But is it just a matter, when you say kind of practice or to understand, is it a matter of having some awareness of what's going on to in yourself at that time? And then I have found, here's the other thing, I might get a note like that and I just cannot let it go. It's like I almost have to I can't think of anything else until I've responded to that in some way.
Yeah. And
how do I work with that?
I'll cheat again and say the meditation is actually a really good way to do that. Okay. Especially, I've been going through Headspace recently, which is they don't pay me to say that, but it's an app that you can get on your phone that will walk you through guided meditations. Okay. And I have ADHD and social anxiety, or not social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder rather. Yeah. So I've been going through their anxiety track, which is it's 30 episodes 30 guided meditations that help you through, and techniques to kind of be with that feeling, but not. It's a lot of.
You can't turn it off.
No, you cannot stop.
You do
anxiety.
Have to learn how to manage it. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's like you can't unwire your brain in those ways. You have to just be capable of going. I can feel that feeling, but I don't have to act on it.
Right.
And that's I'm not gonna lie, I've learned a lot of languages and I've learned a lot of things, and this is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's hard because it's chemical.
Yeah.
And it happens, and your body is trained. You're fighting evolution in a lot of ways to do that. So it's pretty difficult. Any anxiety for you before you came to do this interview session that we had today?
Yeah, a little. It's I've been on a couple of podcasts now, and I'm getting better about it. But it's still, I had to skip the session and sat in the quiet room for a little bit and meditated.
Yeah,
so.
What's good? From that standpoint, you recognized it. I mean, it's just practice, right? For you. Recognize what was going on for you. Meditation works really well. I'll be honest, meditation has been one of those things I've always fought. And part of it is because I can't sit still.
It's really hard.
Like, I had a buddy of mine tell me one time, can you just sit for like a minute and not say anything? And I'm a talker. I love to talk it out. And I couldn't. I don't know if I can. That's funny. You're the second person who's mentioned meditation to me today.
Really?
In this context. Yeah. In fact, Matthew, who was before you, a really bright, brilliant guy, he has said that just brings a centering for him as to be able to meditate.
There is a phrase that gets used. I don't remember if it was Uncle Bob or not. I don't think it was. Somebody who said that one of the important things about software development is sharpening your saws and making sure that your tools are honed, are honed, your skills are honed. And to be honest, meditation for me is very much tuning my instrument, sharpening my own saw it's tuning your brain almost before I start doing things. So I meditate every workday and most weekend days.
Yeah.
So.
No, good. I think it's a good discipline to have. Not even close to ever being able to do it. Maybe it's something I should work on. When in the session, then, as it was an extended session, so and you said you use Legos.
Yeah.
So walk me through a little bit of the exercise.
Yeah. So all of the exercises were designed so that I used the Legos so that you had something to build that you could critique, or somebody could critique rather.
Yeah.
So people would pair up, build something, and then offer feedback to each other about that thing. And they started out kind of light, just working with the 3 types of feedback: evaluation, appreciation, and coaching. And then they kind of moved into working with these triggers, these things that happen when your brain starts protecting you from feedback. And so then I started offering them secret orders, like, well, this group builds this type of thing, this partner builds one thing, and this partner builds a different thing. And then they're critiquing each other based on stuff that's not in their, getting critiqued on things that aren't in their control.
Right.
And so I'm kind of playing them off each other and using that to hopefully get them experienced with those feelings as they occur.
Yeah.
And so that they can be aware that those are happening. In
that artificial environment, is it possible to get that reaction when people know?
It's hard, and they don't know up front that that's what they're specifically going for. But some of it's hard. So I've ran this a couple times at work, and I've toned back the information I'm giving, trying tweaking things. It's still kind of a work in progress, but it went pretty well yesterday.
Yeah. It's almost. Maybe there's a secret in there when we think about when we know we're going to be critiqued, and it's an exercise. We don't take it as seriously, and I don't know if it invokes the same real-time emotions that we would have.
It's almost like a ghost of it, rather than you have to really pay attention. I would love to be like, we'll make this a full course and you'll build this thing and be really invested in it over the course of 3 weeks, and then somebody comes along and is like, well, this looks like crap.
Well, it would almost be interesting to find a way to make them think, have some work where they think that's the critique, but then there's another critique built into it that's not that they're not looking for, right?
Yeah, and there's one of the exercises where they are competing with each other. So it's designed to kind of trigger this relationship thing where they're not trusting the other person's motives.
Yeah. Well, and competition always brings out the worst in people. And if there's a clear winner and a loser, that losing team, sometimes that negative. What made you want to speak on this topic? What was the genesis that brought you to this point?
So I've been giving talks this year on the psychology of motivation is another one of my big talks that I like. So getting into that social psychology has been something that I've been getting really heavily into over the past couple of years, and I started wanting to talk about it. Feedback came up because it's something that everybody needs. You require it. It's one of the only ways that we get better at stuff. right? So the importance of it is, I mean, it is undeniable, and we're just really bad at it as humans, both giving and receiving it. And so I came across this book that was called Thanks for the Feedback. It's by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And that one it really opened my eyes to how feedback works and how your brain is tracking it, and ways that you can both receive feedback better and change your feedback giving so that the person on the other end receives it better.
We have talked a lot about receiving. Let's talk a little bit about giving. What are some tips that you have when you're giving feedback? Because maybe you can stop this adrenaline rush in your partner or the person you're giving feedback to. What did you talk about there?
Some of that's hard to do, because if you're offering somebody critique, like if you're their boss, you have to offer them critiques that are just by nature going to do that. But there are tricks you can do. So for starters, try to not use labels or unpack those labels. And when I say labels, I mean words like be more assertive. The word assertive there is not something somebody can't actually act on that, because my idea of assertive and your idea of assertive can be different, because those are, concepts in our brain that we have tucked and associated with all these other concepts. So it's about breaking that down, and you say, well, I want you to be more assertive. For instance, I want you to make sure that everybody on the sales floor, like every time a person walks on the sales floor, they get your business card. I want you to be like, you don't necessarily need to give them a checklist, but you want to give them ideas of
more actionable items.
Exactly.
Yeah. That have a defined parameters and a view of success. Right.
And so it's, again, you're not trying to give them, you don't want them to be automata. You're not trying to tell them everything to do, but you're giving them examples of the type of things. And I mean, the person on the other end is smart enough to establish that. So.
Well, although, and there may be some cases where laying out success factors, to be successful, you need to do exactly these things.
Yeah, that's 100%
where
true.
that may fit in, right?
If you're, for instance, if you are, if you're telling an employee they need to go on the work improvement plan because their performance isn't up to par, that's a case where there are pretty clear consequences. Yeah. And there are pretty clear instructions from you as far as what your feedback is going to be, right? You have this amount of feedback. I expect you to do this. Show up at 8 o'clock in the morning when you're supposed to. I expect you to do this. And so part of that about the feedback is not just how you give it. It's also making sure that the other person is very clear about what are the consequences if I don't follow this feedback?
Yeah.
What are the expectations that you have for me? So,
yeah, certainly everyone receives and gives feedback differently based on who they are and their own strengths, right? Any thought in the session to fully understanding the person you're giving the feedback to, if at all possible, before that feedback is given?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some of it where you have to understand the person's wiring, how they are going to receive it. Because some people take negative feedback very harshly, like they take it really hard, and they stay down for a long time. So those people, if you're offering them coaching feedback or evaluation feedback where that is negative, you need to turn around and give them time to process it afterward, because they're not going to be ready to talk to you about an improvement plan, because they're just going to be wrapped in their own heads up around their own axle.
Right.
So
and as a manager, let's say, because that happens a lot of times in a management, how important is knowing that and then just stopping to give that? In other words, you've invoked that.
I think it's really important, and I don't know that we necessarily are looking for it or trained. We're not trained to look for it, and sometimes we feel like we just need to plow ahead, get the conversation done and over with. But especially if we do something like offer an employee an evaluation and then immediately move on to ways to improve, they're not listening to the improvement part. Their brain is stuck on whatever score you gave them.
Yeah.
Because it was so loud.
Yeah.
And now they're at best, they're just cycling in their head about that score. At worst, they're internally arguing with everything you say. And that's bad for both of you, because they'll walk away from the conversation feeling even worse than they would if you'd just given them the score. And you've already blown the talk. Like, if you want to have the talk about it, it's going to sound like a repeat for both of you, which is worse. So,
any credence into separating those two out to let
absolutely
someone process? So push a score out,
if
whatever,
by a couple of days if you can.
Okay, interesting. Because I think a lot of folks just do that here's your score, and now we're going to talk about it.
Well, from a manager's perspective, I've got 12 people to go through, and I mean the hours I have to spend on assembling those damn things in the first place, and then actually giving them to people, and now I've got to wait 2 days before I can actually check that off my list. But in terms of letting people listen to you and actually, maybe the question is, do you just want to get it off your list, or do you want your employees to improve? Right?
Yeah. Right on. No, right on. What kind of feedback did you get on your feedback session? Did anybody give any feedback?
I actually, as we went through the exercises, I asked for feedback on, were the instructions clear? What did you guys think? Do you have any improvements? And I've got some really good suggestions on other things to cover. I got some really clear feedback that I went too long. So I had to
the first time you presented that?
I presented it a couple times at work, but it's the first time at a conference that I've actually presented it. So just some tweaking I got to do.
Yeah. How'd you feel when you got that you went too long feedback?
Not great.
Yeah. So did it trigger? Did you feel yourself being triggered? And then
a little bit, yeah, because it's that kind of, that's an identity trigger,
right?
Where I have an identity where it's like I'm a good speaker, right? Which we all have identities like that, where we have our positive self-images. Receiving feedback that harms that self-image can make us feel really down, and if we let it, actually, we will let that flood to other aspects of our personality, to the point of like, I'm not only a bad speaker, I'm also a poor father, or poor son, or whatever.
Right.
So you kind of have to, again, take that awareness and go, okay, that's some feedback. I'll deal with it.
Super hard, isn't it?
It's but this is where I feel like, I mean, a lot of these topics are hard. Understanding motivation for your employees is hard. Understanding how to give feedback well is hard. Understanding what's going on inside of people's brains is difficult. But in some ways, I feel like it's almost way more important than, how to build the latest microservice platform du jour. Not insulting anybody else at the conference naturally, but that's why I speak about these topics. So.
I agree with you. I think there's something to it, especially from a manager understanding the folks that he's managing and who they're working with, and then the teams understanding each other and how they're wired and what their triggers are and how they receive feedback. And we have this question all the time. We ask at Gallup about what's your best day at work, and we kind of try to design or develop or create systems to make that happen on a fairly regular basis. And yet there are triggers. We all have these triggers that we hit for whatever reason, and you may be having a bad day, and so that trigger trips a little sooner, right? From that standpoint. So no, good. So feedback was mostly good. You got a little bit of maybe a little too long, and that happens, right? We get talking. Anything else in there that you want to add to the audience here listening? I might have overlooked or didn't ask.
No, it's my first time at HDC, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'm really glad that they asked me here to give my workshop. I'd originally submitted it as 2 one-hour talks, and they pushed me to submit it as a workshop instead. I'm really glad they did.
How long was the workshop?
It was 3.5 hours. So.
That's good. That's good time. I had to come back and I had to submit our StrengthsFinder workshop to this sometime.
That would be interesting.
I don't know why we've never done that. I'll have to do that. Well, Arthur, thank you very much. Hang tight for just 1 second. I'm going to mute the mics here and we'll go off. I've got another interview in the next few minutes here, and so we will be back shortly. Thanks for listening.